All right, welcome back to the Copywriters Podcast with your host, the world's greatest copywriting coach, David Garfinkel. David, how are you doing today?
Nathan, I'm good. How are you?
I'm fantastic, and if people are viewing on video, they already know the cat's out of the bag. We got a very special guest lined up for this week's episode, so I'm going to turn it over to you and play a fly on the wall.
All right, let's do that. So our guest, here's a little backstory. In the great financial meltdown of 2009, Colin Chung lost his job with eBay. And despite having no experience in copywriting, he decided that was the next stretch of his career path. 18 months from then, he had doubled his eBay income and was earning six figures for the first time in his life as a freelance copywriter. A year later, he doubled it. And before long after that, Colin was making really big bucks. Not only that, he ended up writing for major clients, including J. Abraham, Clayton Makepeace, Mike Dillard, Agora, and even a Shark Tank investor. Also, from 2014 to 2020, Colin was the primary coach for John Carlton's Simple Writing System, where he coached many freelancers, business owners, and other aspiring copywriters. After all this, Colin decided to reveal his secrets. And I say secrets because his approach, the way he describes it, is different from the approach of any other successful copywriter I've ever talked to or heard of. He'll tell us about the approach today. But first, I'd like to tell you about this. Copy is powerful. You're responsible for how you use what you hear in this podcast. Most of the time, common sense is all you need. But if you make extreme claims, and if you're writing copy for offers in highly regulated industries like health, finance, and business opportunity, you may want to get a legal review after you write and before you start using your copy. My larger clients do this all the time. So, Colin, welcome, and thanks for being here.
Thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
Sure. Take us back to the early days. I know that's it's like almost 14 years ago. How did you get started? What did you learn? And what did you find that, the conventional wisdom was not the path you really followed, was it?
No. So back in those days, and I think it's still true today, a lot of gurus and whatever, they'll tell you, hey, you got to create a social media account, write a blog, or have an email list and start building your audience and just like get yourself out there and everywhere. But I did do that originally, but then I got a mentor who told me to stop doing that. And the core and main reason was, well, who's really reading your blog or email newsletter? Which other copywriters, it's not really clients. And that gave me the insight to go under the radar, be more discreet about who I talk to, and that taught me how to network and connect and, island hop, if you will, from one client to another. And it's not that different from the way John Carlton did it. So if you've ever read his freelancing secrets, or I forget whatever the course was, he did the same thing. Like, he started hanging out with J. Abraham, and then he got passed on to Halbert, and then he became his own thing. Like, he was jumping from one type of client to another, and he never, like, back in the early 90s, it wasn't like there was a blog or anything that you had to do, right? It's just learning how to connect with the right people.
Yeah. So, how could you even connect with somebody if you'd never written copy before? How did you start this? Because I think this is a question in a lot of people's minds.
Yeah.
I'm brand new. I don't have a whole bunch of clips to show people, samples. Don't have a track record. I don't have a ton of testimonials. What are some key starting point things that are important?
So, as you know, I recently put out a Freelancer course, and what I focused on the first 18 months of my career, and had multiple mentors in my career, but like the first one I got was trading sweat equity for coaching. So like I would do like the boring stuff like putting up his WordPress blog or like organizing his email list. In return, he gave me some copy tips. And that gave me my initial foothold, and that gave me a few samples. But at the end of the day, the first 6 months just suck. That's really what it is. And it's just like the whole connection thing that we want to talk about for this episode doesn't really happen until you do have those initial pieces of work. And those first few months was cold emailing and spamming my website everywhere. All the typical things just to get a few jobs. And you have to recognize those first few jobs don't matter. They're more for building your portfolio.
Right. So you have to cast your pride and your preciousness aside and say, I'm just going to dive in, put my head down and get it done. I'll get to have a life again in a year or two.
Yeah. So, the first year just sucks. But once you have those initial portfolio pieces, then you can start leveraging that and moving it to the next client and saying, hey, I have pieces. And finding the right mentors also help. Just that I like finding mentors and masterminds and coaching groups and whatnot wasn't so much for the actual educational content so much as connecting with people. So like when I joined John Carlton's mastermind in 2010, after the first mastermind, I realized, John is just regurgitating everything I've read of him to me, except I paid $10,000 for it. But that was okay because that was not why I was there. I was there because there were other people who paid $10,000, and now I was connecting with these people, talking to them, showing who I am, and that led to jobs, that led to more jobs, that led to more jobs.
So when you say connecting, that can mean a lot of different things to a lot of people. And when we were, prepping for this, one thing you told me is the high-level client you're looking for, you need to talk to them differently. You need to connect with them a different way. Can you give some examples of that or tell us some stories or give some tips?
Yeah, absolutely. So right before this podcast, I was looking up Neil Gaiman's 2012 commencement speech, and he gives some freelancer advice. Good freelancers need three things. One, be good at your job. That's obvious. Two, hit deadlines. And three, be pleasant to work with. And I think I leaned in on the deadlines and be pleasant to work with. I'm not saying I didn't deliver on the copy. I did. I've obviously written a lot of copy that has made a lot of money. But ultimately, you have to be that kind of person that it's a joy to talk to. And I don't know how to describe that more than it's being gracious, it's being kind, it's being insightful, it's being honest, it's caring, and it's commitment, and it's just being a good person. And I think there's been a disservice done to a lot of aspiring copywriters over the last 20, 30 years. When it all started with Garrett Halbert putting on that hat saying clients suck, and then putting a whole 1 hour talk about how to be a jerk and still get jobs. And it created a whole generation of aspiring copywriters who think that's the way to be as a freelancer. Right?
Yeah.
And it's not.
In the real world, that doesn't work. And if you dig deep into Gary's life, he paid a price for that more than once.
Absolutely. And then you had the similar whole miserly outlook that Dan Kennedy put on, right? And again, it's not helpful.
Do you mean emotionally miserly?
He was emotionally miserly, but he also had that attitude of like, you gotta, it's very transactional for him. Like he didn't have his boundary was, do you have money? If you have money, you can be in my inner circle. And what kind of people does that attract? Right? People with money, and that's their only metric. So when I'm talking about like caring and commitment, like every client I've had, I've cared. And it's such a simple thing, but it's hard to like explain to an aspiring copywriter what that means. To care and to be committed to helping your client reach their vision. And it's being that kind of good person. But at the same time, recognizing when you have to draw boundaries. And I think that's the balance that most aspiring copywriters don't have. They either are complete pushovers and they're like, yeah, I'll say yes to everything and then get in trouble or take too little money, or being a complete jerk about it and asking for too much and not delivering anything. And there's like a whole generation of that right now. And we won't mention names, but like there's a lot of alpha bros out there who are not qualified to write long form copy, but they're asking 10, 15, 20K for a sales letter. And when I was mentoring a junior copywriter the last 2-3 years, every client we talked to was like, oh yeah, we've dealt with that group and they did not show up, they did not deliver, or they took the money and ran, they ghosted us. And it's like, you're not teaching the proper freelancing skills there.
So I guess, the ability to care, either you're brought up with it or it's inherent in you or it's not. But I mean, can you give some examples or tips or suggestions? Because, this is a very different world than having a staff job at a corporation or, I don't know, being a novelist or something like that. I mean, on top of that, a copywriter has to be mentally flexible in a way that has nothing to do with how much they care about their client particularly, but more like, in one hand, you are a contractor, a service provider. On the other hand, you're almost like the chairman of the board. You're the chief profit officer. I mean, it's going to be your job to make sure that this promotion, maybe even this business goes. I mean, I agree with you that Dan Kennedy could have put a lot more human warmth into his whole thing, but you got to be and do what you got to be and do. But one thing that he said, which I really liked, was sometimes you can reinvent someone's entire business with one sales letter.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I've done it and I've seen others do it for sure.
Yeah.
And I love what Carlton told me a long time ago. You got to be the adult in the room. So it's like, you're not being an asshole about it, but you have to develop that trust and that connection in order for them to follow you. So there's an element of learning leadership.
That's interesting. I like that because I've always, they didn't let Warren Buffett into Harvard Business School because he didn't show an desire for leadership. I mean, leadership is such of course, he got into Columbia Business School and still did okay for himself. It's such a shape-shifting, the definition is so shape-shifting of leadership. And yet you're right. You're not the one taking all the financial risk. You're not the one with the assets and the payroll and, all the other liabilities or vulnerabilities that come with actually owning the business. And yet you, as a copywriter, you need to show leadership. Can you talk about how you've done that and how someone else should approach that?
Even better terminology would probably be trusted advisor.
Okay.
And the example I like to go to is Littlefinger from Game of Thrones.
All right.
He's just someone who not doing all the shenanigans he did, but it's being of value to someone, giving them advice in an honest way. Well, I guess Littlefinger doesn't apply anymore. But it is giving advice in an honest way. Really being a kind of person, and I don't want to keep talking about things that are maybe innate to me, but it's like, all my life, I've been the kind of person that listens attentively, and people will share stuff that they probably shouldn't share with me. I end up being a confidant. And it's once you have that kind of relationship where they are confiding in you, you can address what they're going through better. And it's never really about the sales letter. although that is what makes the business go and it keeps the thing running, it's what are they really looking for? And everybody thinks it's because they want to make more money. Well, yes, but there's also ego involved. There's also like understanding all the different things they've tried that didn't work, all the copywriters that they worked with that didn't work, and why you can deliver on that. You create that safety for them to go, yes, I trust in this copywriter or this freelancer, and I will follow their advice, and that advice will actually work. I get a feeling that most freelancers give good advice, but if you don't create that safety, that environment of safety, they won't act on the advice. And if they don't act,
you also need to create an atmosphere, not just an atmosphere, but
an environment,
a sense about yourself of authority without being overbearing,
absolutely.
Overbearing.
Yes. Yeah. That one took a while for me to get down, because I tend to be overbearing. I tend to be very aggressive, and I think to a certain degree I get away with it because I'm a guy, and I think most men do get away with that, whereas female freelancers have a little more trouble doing that. But with that said, yes, absolutely, you do have to develop a sense of authority. And that comes down to you knowing everything about the business and just asking the right questions, and caring. And then once you have that authority, then you can deliver the advice that they need.
Yeah, I've mentioned this in the podcast before, but I think here it's especially helpful. I remember right after 9/11. And there were a lot of people very far to the left in Hollywood, and they were saying, well, this is the United States' fault, and, really, really taking some extreme and absurd positions.
Yeah.
And there was a reporter in Hollywood talking to a news anchor, and they said, are they going to lose work? Are they destroying their careers by this? And the Hollywood Inside guy said, no. In Hollywood, they don't care too much about who or what you're sleeping with or what your political beliefs are. There are really two questions if you're good. The first question is, how much do you cost? And the second question is, how easy are you to work with?
Yep.
And we're, as copywriters, we're similar, I think, to Hollywood actors in that way. We're very different in many, many other ways. And that how easy are you to work with, I think you're breaking it down better than I've heard before. It's the safety, it's the trust, it's the authority, it's the listening. A lot of copywriters don't listen. I've talked to more than a few who are real blowhards.
I think on the aspiring side, they're too insecure too, because they've been taught X, Y, and Z, and that the regurgitate X, Y, Z. And then I think the experienced blowhards are that way because, again, I think there's just been a huge disservice done to copywriters because of the gurus we have in our industry saying, you got to be that kind of jerk. And that's why they'll listen to you. Which sucks because it does create a lot of... I mean, it's funny you brought up Hollywood because, there are super talented people like Ed Norton, but nobody wants to work with him anymore. Because he's a jerk.
Yeah. I mean, to some degree, the braggadocio that you need to write, to come up with really big claims, assuming they're compliant. I need to sort of put that footnote in there.
Yeah, for sure.
It comes from a personality that isn't exactly, the one who stands in the corner at the party.
Well, let's talk about that because we have a really great example in our world of someone who has that humble humility, but also super confident. It's Gary Bencivenga, right? You meet the guy. He is the nicest individual. He is generous in his advice. And like the first time I met him, he complimented me because of my connection to Fishman. And I was like, this guy is so clean, so discreet, so nice, so private. And he never did the guru thing, right? He did 2 seminars in his entire life. He did his retirement one, and he went to Talk of Titans. That was it. He's not looking for that celebrity status. And I think that is another thing that really sabotages you. Constantly looking for that celebrity status.
Yeah, I agree. Of course, his work spoke for itself, and as mild-mannered as you say he was, and I agree with you. Although I'll tell you something funny. I've never told anybody this on publicly. I came out with a product in 1996. It was a little audio tape called "Let Your Clients Do Your Selling," and Halbert, for reasons I will never know, promoted it in this pink sheet. And I got this phone call, and it was a voicemail, and it said, "This is Gary Bensavenga. Gary Bensavenga. Gary Bensavenga. Please call me." And he said his name 5 times. But he wasn't rude. He was just assertive, you know?
Yeah, okay.
But well, it was funny.
What was the phone call for?
He wanted to buy a copy. I mean, I didn't have a website set up. He wanted to buy a copy of my audio cassette on getting referrals.
I'm wondering, maybe he thought you didn't know him and he needed to repeat his weird, difficult name 5 times.
Yeah, he wasn't really that well known at that time. But
Right.
The other thing I want to say about him is, for those who did know him, who were competing against him, they feared him. You know,
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
they feared competing with him.
Yeah.
They respected him. They liked him.
He's talented. That's the thing. You don't.
He's talented.
Of course.
And he worked his ass off. I mean, he
yeah.
really worked. He engineered every minute of his day, and he really worked on keeping his brain, focused in just the right place. So yeah, he's a great model. But the other thing I want to say, it's not always occurring these days, but it's easy to be genteel when you're at the top. It's
I don't know. I would disagree with that because I played that game for my entire career, like just being nice and kind. But at the same time, you have to know, and this one thing my mentor taught me is like you have to know when to pull out the knives.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I mean, especially when you're starting out, because you're going to get clients that will try to exploit and take advantage of you. Now, fortunately for me, I was bullied as a kid, 80s nerd, and I just don't put up with it. So I'm very much aware when I am being bullied or when I'm being gaslit or when they're trying to take advantage of me. But what my mentor taught me is how to make them swallow their own knives. And what that means is like, you just need to be very careful. You document everything. And then if you were listening and paying attention, being kind and being generous, they're going to give you a lot of information that you can then go, well, you said this, and you can turn it back on them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's just knowing the game. And that is the dark side of freelancing, or just playing at the high stakes level, is knowing that there are times where you have to.
There are times when you have to get tough, whether you like that or not, whether you're comfortable with it or not. That's absolutely true.
And I think that's really difficult for most people, especially if you're coming from the 9 to 5 and your typical public education system. You've been taught to listen to your teachers, your preachers, your parents, whatever, and then it's rebelling, but doing it in a way that's not outward. And I don't know if I'm especially good at it because I'm Asian and the way we rebel is passive aggressively, or what. My favorite way of rebelling is malicious compliance. I don't know if you ever read Robert Anton Wilson's Illuminatus trilogy.
No,
but he talks about that in his books. Like, malicious compliance is just the funnest way to rebel, is when you follow everything they say to the letter of the law. And I'm not recommending you do this, but like if you're in a job and your boss is a complete blowhard, it's the funnest way to rebel.
Nathan, you must have some thoughts or questions. I mean, this has been too stimulating.
I would just say, how dare you speak about our public education system like that, sir?
Hey, I grew up in Canada and we had a good one, but you know, at the end of the day, they're similar in the sense that they teach you
Compliance.
follow the rules. Follow the rules.
David, I don't know how much we have more to go. I'm running on a hard stop here pretty soon. Before we wrap it up, though, I did want to make sure that we give Colin the chance to inform our listeners about anything that he wanted to let them know about.
Oh yeah, tell them about freelance course, and we've set up a special link. So,
Oh
please
yeah.
talk.
Before I do that, can I give some actual tips that people can use?
Sure.
So, like, I mean, I've been talking about attitude and mindset for the last 30 minutes, but like, there are ways to actually externalize it. And I'll give 5 things that I did a lot of when I was starting out. And you were the recipient of one of them, actually, David. Write handwritten thank you notes. Pick up the bill if you ever meet up with them and you're at the restaurant. It's not, you know, fighting over the bill is not just a Chinese thing. It's just it's signaling to your client that you're there to you're taking charge. You're the one that's the authority. So the one that you were the recipient of. If you recall, like one of the early talks, like I just kept asking you questions, and I kind of figured out that Oban was your favorite Scotch.
You did.
So then, if you recall, I called up the nearest liquor store and I bought you a bottle, and they sent you a notice to go pick it up. And that is such a small thing, but it is a huge gesture, and you have never forgotten it.
That's right.
And that leads you to talk to other people positively about me. And after our pre-call, Doberman Dan reached out to me again because you were just talking to him. And that network effect is one of my biggest secrets. It's like just listening to what they're interested in and just like sending them a little gift, it goes a long way. Forwarding them articles that they're interested in. So like, again, so Michael Fishman, I sent a lot of jazz stuff because I knew he was really into jazz.
Yeah.
It's having that attitude of just caring, listening, and sending little things. But let's talk about the Freelancer course. So the link, I'll throw that out right now. It's garfinkel.thefederation.io. This is something that is 10 years in the making. I've always wanted to do a Freelancer course to talk about the way I built my Freelancer career, and I'm finally doing it. But I wanted to do something that talked about the things we talked about in this episode, which is like, it's not about 7 tips. It's not about building a funnel. It's not about just sending a whole bunch of cold emails and here's the template to do it. It really comes down to your character and your attitude and knowing how to play the game in a way where you work on who you are and how you act in the ecosystem that you've decided to work in as a freelancer. And that's really what this course is about. I mean, I still give you practical tips like here's how to set up a website and why a website matters or doesn't matter and all those little things. But the core of this course is about being. It's about who you are.
Yeah. It's interesting. You know, I've heard a lot of people talk about these concepts, and most of them are not very successful, or maybe they don't understand the concepts, or maybe they think their job is to share these concepts with the world. Obviously, that's not you. You took 10 years before you even started talking about it publicly, although I know you've talked about it with friends and stuff. Yeah, I mean, you've really thought about it. And I think much more importantly, you found a way to make it work.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the best people I know and the ones who remain my friends in this business have those qualities. Everyone's different. Nobody's perfect, but yeah. And I'm sure, and there are people who are promoting those bro ideas that are, you know, kind of, you know, poisoning their own name and hurting a lot of other people's careers. So
Yeah.
I would encourage people to check this thing out. It's very reasonably priced. You know, at this point, I know the price is going to go up the more people buy it, but I think that people can get into the lowest price if they. Yeah, we're going to put the link in the show notes. So, yeah, that's.
I mean,
good.
they have to know how to spell your name, I guess. Garfinkel.
Yeah, Garfinkel. Yeah.
E-L, not L-E. E-L.
Yeah, E-L. Thank you, Colin. I appreciate that.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for putting this episode together. Again, we will have the link to check out this course in the show notes of this episode. If you want to get those, head on over to copywriterspodcast.com. While you're there, make sure that you like and subscribe on whatever your favorite podcast app is. And until next time, we will catch you later.
Catch you later.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.